Hello, everybody, and I wanted to welcome you to episode 13 of Talkin' Tunes with Dr. Tony. And today is the first day of daylight savings time, so I'm hoping that everybody's going to enjoy having the extra few hours of daylight in the evening. And it's also the day that the March Madness pairings are going to be announced. And some of you may know that I'm a professor at Kennesaw State University, and our university is going to be going into March Madness for the first time in our history. So we did win our conference, which is the Atlantic Sun Conference, so it'll be interesting to see who we get matched up with and how far in the tournament we can go. So today, as I mentioned to you last time, I'm going to be covering my second trifecta, and this artist actually has two trifectas, which is a very noteworthy accomplishment. Now, the second trifecta, which I may cover in a future video, could be argued, but I think that this video here that I'm going to do is indisputable. Remember, the criteria for this is that the recordings that came before the first member of the trifecta must be not as good as the first one in the trifecta, and then the ones that came after the third member of the trifecta also must not be as good as the third one. So the artist in question is David Bowie. You know, David Bowie first attracted attention in 1969 with his song Space Oddity, and a lot of people don't know the title or the song by the title, but again, it's Major Tom to Ground Control, starts off like that. And this song established the outer space connection that was to come later on. Now, he also recorded a song in 1970 called The Man Who Sold the World, which was famously covered by Nirvana in an MTV Unplugged show from 1993. Now, what's interesting is that The Man Who Sold the World was not released as a single by Bowie during this time, and the artist known as Lulu, she did cover it in 1974, and Lulu is known primarily for the theme song from the movie To Sir With Love, and also she had a romantic relationship with Maurice Gibbs from the Bee Gees. Now, hundreds of people have covered The Man Who Sold the World, so it's a very popular song. So let's talk about the trifecta. All three albums that I'm going to be discussing were certified platinum, and this means that they sold at least 1 million copies. Now, one of the things that we don't know, and maybe I don't know, but maybe you do, is we don't know what sort of trend these sales had. Were they 1 million records sold in 1 year? Were they 1 million sold over 10 years? We really don't know, but eventually all three of these albums I'm going to be talking about were certified platinum. And David Bowie did not have another platinum album until Scary Monsters and Super Creeps was released in 1980. So the first album I'm going to talk about is from 1971, and it's Hunky Dory. And I purchased this album after it was released. As a matter of fact, I bought it in 1972, and my first exposure to David Bowie was not Space Oddity or The Man Who Sold the World. It was Suffragette City. And I remember driving from my hometown, Bell, California, to where I was living at the time in Hermosa Beach. And I was riding as a passenger with my roommate, Ken, and we heard this song, Suffragette City, but we really didn't know that much about it. We thought that the lyric said, "I'm going to stop at your city." So we didn't even know what he was saying, but the song was very, very infectious and led to my purchase of that second album. But Hunky Dory is much more eclectic than the albums that followed. And I mentioned to you before that I've been looking at this site called Rate Your Music, and Hunky Dory is rated at a 4.03 out of 5. And of all the albums released in 1971, the viewers or the people that look at Rate Your Music, they ranked it as number 5. Now, what's noteworthy about this album as well, it was his first recording on RCA Records, and also his first recording with Ken Scott, who ended up producing the next 2 albums after this. So he produced all 3 albums I'm talking about today. And Ken Scott did some work with the Beatles and also did a lot of production with other artists like the Mahavishnu Orchestra, Supertramp. So he was very, very capable, and he's still recording to this day. And I think the guy is probably 86 years old, so he's still working. So Hunky Dory had the first appearance of the Spiders from Mars, but they also had Rick Wakeman playing piano on this album, but he's called Richard Wakeman. And rumor has it that after Hunky Dory, Rick Wakeman was asked to join the Spiders from Mars and continue on recording, but as you probably know, he opted to go to Yes and had an amazing career with them. But can you imagine what the Spiders from Mars would have sounded like with Rick Wakeman as a full-fledged member later on? Now, one thing that's interesting is that Rick Wakeman did play Mellotron on Space Oddity, so he was with David Bowie before this album. So on to Hunky Dory. There are 11 songs, and side 1 and side 2 end with cuts that are longer than 5 minutes. And those songs are Quicksand and the Bewley Brothers. And so this album kicks off with Changes. And this album also is the first time that David Bowie played saxophone on one of his recordings. And the success of Changes, as well as the success of Hunky Dory, was based on the success of the album that followed this. So people that purchased David Bowie's second release in 1972, they loved it so much that they went back and they discovered Hunky Dory. So it wasn't that big of a seller during its heyday. Now, the song Changes appeared as a B-side of Space Oddity as a single in 1975. And it appeals to younger people just because there's an alienation on that song Changes. Now the next one is Oh You Pretty Things, and the lyric says, "Gotta make way for the homo superior." So again, it looks like David Bowie is continuing with his space theme because he's probably referring to superior life form coming from outer space. And then he also mentions that Homo sapiens, who are us, we've outgrown our use. Now, on this song, there's fantastic piano playing from Rick Wakeman. Now, continuing with side 1, we have the song Life on Mars. And once again, he's still continuing to focus on outer space. And if David Bowie had a signature song, Life on Mars would probably work as well as any. I do recall seeing a video of him shortly before he died, and he was performing the song, so it was something that he really enjoyed playing. Again, excellent piano playing by Rick Wakeman and great orchestration. Side 1 ends with the song Quicksand, and this is somewhat of a precursor to the song from '72 called Rock and Roll Suicide. Quicksand builds with a acoustic guitar, just playing some chords, and there's great orchestration, and once again, it refers to Homo sapiens. Side 2 shows an influence from Bob Dylan and the Velvet Underground. So there is a song called A Song for Bob Dylan. Then there's a song called Andy Warhol, which you may know was a primary sponsor of the Velvet Underground. And then there's a song called Queen Bitch, which I think does the Velvet Underground one better. It's fantastic, fantastic song. And David Bowie was a big Velvet Underground fan, and he was instrumental in reviving Lou Reed's solo career. He, along with Mick Ronson, produced Lou Reed's solo album from 1972 called Transformer. So going back to Hunky Dory, side 2, it starts off with a song called Fill Your Heart, and this is a fun song. Sounds a little bit like something you hear in a Broadway musical. Bowie did not write it, but once again, there's great piano and orchestra, and it either has a segue that leads to the next song, Andy Warhol, or the segue is at the beginning of the song. It just kind of blends in to each other. But this Andy Warhol song shows the experimental side of David Bowie that he would be known for later in his career. The next song, Song for Bob Dylan, David Bowie does a Dylan affectation. And for me, this is my least favorite song on the album. And then we have Queen Bitch, and Mick Ronson's guitar sound on this song is amazing and is a preview of what you would hear predominantly on the next album. Queen Bitch is definitely the most rocking tune on the album. So Hunky Dory, when it was released, only got to number 57 in the Billboard 200, but it was number 3 in the UK charts. And as I mentioned, its platinum status was probably released later on. So the album, the Bewley Brothers, as with Quicksand, has a rock and roll suicide vibe to it. So, and it also, for me, is reminiscent of some of Peter Gabriel's work on his first solo album, specifically Moribund the Burgermeister, where there's some really, really strange sound effects and lyrics. Some of the lyrics are, lay me place and bake me pie, I'm starving, for me gravy, leave my shoes and door, I might just slip away. So, in my opinion, if David Bowie had never released another album, he likely would have been remembered for the artistry that he displays on Hunky Dory, specifically with Changes and Life on Mars. But this was not the case, because in 1972, according to Rate Your Music, the album he released, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, was the #1 album. And Rate Your Music also rates it as number 12 of all time. Now, back in the mid-1970s, I created a top 10 list, and this was in my top 10. So I've been a fan of this album ever since it came out. It may be in the top 10 for the longest album title. Now, I had a chance to see David Bowie only one time, and that was on March 10th, 1973, which is some 50 years to the day that I wrote the narrative for this video. So I saw him in concert at the Long Beach Arena, and he played 6 of the 11 songs from Ziggy Stardust. Now, Ziggy Stardust, like Hunky Dory, has all originals except one, and that is the last song on side 1, which is called It Ain't Easy, which, in my opinion, could have very easily have been left off. This song was covered by Three Dog Night, and David Bowie never played it in concert. So when Ziggy Stardust first came out, it initially had a lukewarm critical reception, so I think that the critics were somewhat befuddled and really didn't know what to make of it. But Rolling Stone today, they rank it as number 6 out of the top 100 albums, and I think it's nearly a perfect album. Side 2 is amazing because it ain't easy. But everything flows. Everyone is on top of their game. Hang On to Yourself is a fantastic song. I also love the song Starman because when I hear there's a starman, to me it sounds like somewhere over. No, I don't know if you pick up on that, but that's what I hear. And then the chorus, da, 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 to me it sounds like the chorus from Hey Jude. So there are a couple things there that have influenced those songs, in my opinion. We have the song Moon Age Daydream. Amazing, amazing guitar solo. And then the song Ziggy Stardust, the great lyric, where were the spiders when the fly tried to, you know the rest. So I don't have much else to say about this album except to listen often and enjoy it. We could spend the whole episode on Ziggy Stardust, but I think if you're a fan, you don't need any convincing because it is a spectacular album, unprecedented and very, very original. So now we come to the third member of the Trifecta, and it's Aladdin Sane from 1973. So as you know, it's a play on words. First name Aladdin, last name Sane, or it's a lad who is insane. And again, David Bowie changes his persona. So on Hunky Dory, the album cover is kind of like a Greta Garbo persona. And then Ziggy Stardust, well, that's obvious. But now he changes the persona again. And in this album, there is less space imagery, but on the song Drive-In Saturday, he talks about an astronet. Rate Your Music, this album has lower ratings than Hunky Dory and Ziggy Stardust. It's got a 3.82 out of 5. And of all the albums released in 1973, the readers of Rate Your Music rated it as the 22nd best album. But it went to number 1 in the UK and went to number 17 in the US. So it charted higher initially than Hunky Dory, but I think that was primarily on the heels and the momentum of Ziggy Stardust. So as I mentioned, it's a platinum album, the third album produced by Ken Scott. Now, let's talk a little bit about Ken Scott and what happened afterwards. So after Aladdin Sane, Bowie released Pinups, which are all cover songs, and then Diamond Dogs. And Diamond Dogs, David Bowie produced that album. And I think that album is not nearly as good as Aladdin Sane. The production is really, really strange, and the songs just are not as well written. But you may have your own opinion. So, as with Hunky Dory and Ziggy Stardust, Bowie wrote all the songs on Aladdin Sane except one, which is Let's Spend the Night Together. And I think that the songwriting is not as strong as the prior two albums. It opens with Watch That Man. A great opening song, except Bowie's vocals are somewhat buried in the mix. And I don't know if this was by design because he wanted to emphasize the instrumentation more, but not sure. The second song is a great one. It's the song Aladdin Sane, and there's really good piano playing on this song. Rick Wakeman is no longer with the band, but there is a nice piano solo, and hearkening back to previous songs, when I hear the piano playing, I hear Tequila, da 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 da, and I hear that, but it's a little bit in a minor key and more dissonant. So check it out and see if you can hear Tequila there. On side 2, we have the song Jean Genie, and if you know the song by the Yardbirds, I'm a Man, you can definitely hear the influence of that on Jean Genie. And I'm a Man was a cover of, or very highly influenced by Bo Diddley. So this album was the last album with the Spiders from Mars. So Bowie basically changed it up big time after this album. On side 2, there's a song called Time, very theatrical, vaudeville-like. It's has some really cool piano, but there's a lack of subtlety on this album. For example, Cracked Actor. It's pretty obvious what this song's about, and I was really not a fan of that type of subject matter, but it was nice to see that Bowie did move on to some more sophisticated music in the future. Let's talk a little bit about Let's Spend the Night Together. I would say it's not better than the Rolling Stones version, but it's also not worse. It's very different than the original, and there's so much energy. It's just really, really a cool song. And then we have Lady Grinning Soul ending the album. It's very melodramatic. Has a pretty cool piano introduction. So if I had to give some ratings for these albums, my ratings, I would give Hunky Dory a 9.5 out of 10, and I would discount it because of the song for Bob Dylan. Ziggy, I would give 9.75 out of 10 because of It's Not Easy. And then Aladdin Sane, I would give it an 8 out of 10. So just to give a mention about Diamond Dogs, I don't care for the production. It does have the great song Rebel Rebel, but I would give that a 7 out of 10. So anyway, that's what I had to share with you today. I hope that you enjoyed my presentation of David Bowie's best 3 albums. Well, not best 3, because he had some really good ones later on. But these 3 really came along during a formative time of my music listening experience, and I just really enjoyed it. So anyway, I hope I hope you have a good rest of your day. And as I often mention, please subscribe to the channel. I really look forward to some comments, and I hope you like what you saw. So I'll talk with you next.